Good evening. That was Eternal Father Strong to Save in honor of Memorial Day coming up here this weekend. And of course, Neil being in the Navy. So we have to have the Navy hymn on and around Memorial Day. Tonight, we're going to continue on with Job, beginning at verse 27 and going through chapter 31, I believe. So let's begin with prayer. Lord God, we give you thanks for gathering us together tonight around Job, around your word. And we ask you, Lord, that you would be with us and that you would open our hearts and our minds so that we might be able to hear what you say to us and, more than that, apply it to our lives. This we ask in your holy name. Amen. All right, so one of the things that I wanted to say tonight is I was talking to somebody who's been with us in Job, and they were talking about the fact that it's easy to lose track of where you are and what you've learned and what we've talked about. And then, of course, we should have some people coming in tonight. People have told me they're going to join us tonight. Who have not been with us. It's a good time to probably on your own review Job 1 through 3. Job 1 through 3, because if you're not really versed in what happened in 1 through 3, the rest of Job can be a little bit of a mystery to you. In fact, a lot of times people will hear the story of Job, just that there was this guy who suffered a great deal, and that's all they really know about it, and then they think it's awfully unfair and horrible that poor Job suffered like that and so forth. But they don't know the whole story if they don't know 1 through 3, and of course that's the story of where the devil comes into the throne room of heaven and suggests to God that the only reason that Job is loyal to him is because God gave him everything, and if God took it all away, Job would curse his name, But of course, Job never did. And that was the much to the chagrin of the devil, that Job would not curse God's name no matter what. Okay, I'm trying the video tonight off of my computer as opposed to off my phone. So I think I can see your comments, but I haven't seen any comments. So I'm not sure if I'm going to see them or not. So if you type comments and I'm not answering you, or I'm not seeing them, maybe send me a text or something, and I'll turn my phone up here so I can hear your texts come in. If you have something to text me about or have a question or something during the course of the evening. Let's see. Let me find my text. There it is. So we're at Job 27, beginning at verse 1. And Job again took up his discourse and said, and remember we finished last week with 26, which was the beginning, sort of the prelude of Job's discourse. And then tonight we're going to hear him. Yes, Deb, you're testing. Thank you. I see the comment. Good. All right, so I can see the comments now. Job began his testing, and so tonight we kind of he kind of launches into his argument more fully this week. Verse 1, and Job took up his discourse and said, "As God surely lives, who has taken away my right, and the Almighty, who has made my soul bitter, as long as my breath is in me, and the Spirit of God is in my nostrils, my lips will not speak falsehood, and my tongue will not utter deceit. Far be it from me to say that you are right, till I die, and will not put away my integrity from me. I hold fast to my righteousness, I will not let go. My heart does not reproach me for any of my days. All right, so Job here swears by what? Okay, we just recently had this discussion. I think it was in Dr. Boudreau's Bible study on Sunday morning. We were talking about swearing, and Luther. We were reading Luther's commentary on that section of Matthew that says, let your yes be yes and your no be no, and don't swear by your head or by Jerusalem, because you can't make a hair on your head black or white. So what good is your swearing with all that? So one of my favorite lessons to teach in confirmation in the Ten Commandments is the second commandment, and the title of the lesson is Cursing, Swearing, and Dirty Words. And we get all that mixed up about what that is, what all those are. Cursing, swearing, and dirty words. Very different things. Cursing is calling God to damn somebody or something. Never our right, never our purview to do that. We never have, only God can determine damnation, never us. And it would never be appropriate for us to ask God to damn someone or something. So cursing is never our privilege. Swearing is when we call God to witness what we're saying or what we're doing. Swearing may be appropriate. There are times that swearing is appropriate. When you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God, in court, is a classic example of where swearing is appropriate. When something is life or death crucial, then swearing might be appropriate. To ask God to witness what you are saying. Okay, swearing is not to be done lightly. It's not to be done with something of which you are unsure or uncertain. It's not to be done frivolously by any means. Dirty words are just that. Dirty words are words that are decided by a particular society at a particular time, that they are inappropriate for public use, that they're rude or crude or socially unacceptable somehow. And of course, we know dirty words change. A word that might be dirty in one generation is considered perfectly fine in another. And of course, then there are some that have remained socially impolite forever. What I tell the kids is, all the time, I tell adults too, dirty words do not offend God. They are just words. God is not offended by dirty words. I tell the kids, your mother may be offended by dirty words, and so therefore you don't use them, because that would, fourth commandment would indicate that you should love and honor your father and mother. And if it offends them that you use any kind of language, it doesn't matter whether you think it's dirty or not, then that would be breaking the fourth commandment. Okay, but it's not breaking the second commandment. Second commandment calls us to honor God's name, and so it's a little I don't know, it's strange to me that we live in a culture and in a society where God's name is used so frivolously. That just all the time you hear God's name used, or Jesus' name used in frivolous ways, and society as a whole doesn't seem to care one way or the other. They seem to feel that it's just fine to use God's name however you want. But in any classroom, shout out an uncouth name for defecation or copulation, and you'll be sitting in the principal's office and waiting for your parent to be called, if you're a grammar school kid. So interestingly enough, God's not offended at all by uncouth words that are used for whatever bodily function you want to think of, but human beings are. So it's interesting that people get upset about dirty words, but couldn't care less about God's name. The fact that Job swears here by God's name, as God lives, who has taken away my right, and the Almighty, who has made my soul bitter, as long as my breath is in me, and the Spirit of God is in my nostrils, my lips will not speak falsehood, and my tongue will not utter deceit. Okay, He's saying that this is important enough that he will use God's name to witness to the truth here. And he will not lie even to get out of this dire situation. Because there are many people who would have said at this point, look, Job, we know that you don't think that you did anything wrong. Clearly you did. Just apologize. And it's an interesting point here. One that this is a hill that I have died on in the past, is that for me, my integrity is very important. And even if it would get me out of a bad situation, just to apologize, just to admit that I did something that people think I did, rather than hold fast to the truth, I'll die on that hill. And that's what Job's saying here too, is that I will not sacrifice my integrity even to get out of this situation. Even as bad as this is, it's more important to me to maintain my integrity. He goes on in verse 7. Let my enemy be as the wicked, and let him who rises up against me be as the unrighteous. For what is the hope of the godless when God cuts him off, when God takes away his life? Here Job is praying for vengeance upon his enemies. Okay, and he's praying that God will avenge him. Not unusual in the Old Testament, particularly, to pray that God will avenge you. David prayed it in a number of his Psalms. Two that I've listed are Psalm 5 and Psalm 54. Both of those Psalms have areas where David's calling God to avenge him, to take vengeance on his enemies. It's not out of bounds to ask God to do that. When you are being persecuted falsely, when you are being punished falsely, it is not out of bounds to ask God to avenge you, because He is our Father, and He will take care of us in whatever way is best. Now, when we pray for God to avenge us, what is not appropriate is to tell him how to do it, because he's going to do it in a way that is best for us and best for our persecutors. Okay, he will do it. He will avenge us, but it won't be necessarily in the way we would like it to happen, or the way that, whatever makes us happy, or makes us feel superior, or whatever those kinds of things are. Verse 9, will God hear his cry when distress comes upon him? The answer to that's a rhetorical question. The answer that Job is anticipating is no, because that was, for the Old Testament person, the worst that it could be, when God does not hear your cry, when distress comes upon you, when God would turn his back on you in the midst of your distress. And of course, we can't read this verse without being reminded of Jesus, right? Jesus on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? Okay, my God, why have you forsaken me? And that's exactly what happened there. Is that Jesus found God's back turned to him in the midst of his distress, right? We're going to skip over 10 through 15 because that's just more of Job crying out to God and what's going to happen to his enemies. Just verse 14, if his children are multiplied, it is for the sword. That's what he's assuming is going to happen. And his descendants have not enough bread. So he's saying that people who persecute him are going to be sorry. He has confidence that God is going to avenge him. Beginning at verse 16, he says, though he heap up silver like dust, speaking of his enemies, though he heap up silver like dust and pile up clothing like clay, So the imagery there is very rich, very opulent. Okay, he may pile it up, but the righteous will wear it, and the innocent will divide the silver. So what's going to happen to all of his clothing that he has piled up? The righteous are going to wear it. It's going to come. It's going to come to the righteous. The wicked can pile it up, but the righteous will wear it. Let's see, verse 18. He builds his house like a moth's, like a booth that a watchman makes. Okay, what happens to a moth's house? Okay, it's only temporary, right? Eventually, it is destroyed, right? So it's temporary. He goes to bed rich, but will do so no more. He opens his eyes, and his wealth is gone. Terrors overtake him like a flood. In the night, a whirlwind carries him off. The east wind lifts him up, and he is gone. It sweeps him out of his place. It hurls at him without pity. He flees from its power in headlong flight. It claps its hand at him and hisses at him from its place. So all of this is to say, it's all various kinds of metaphors for the wicked being undone. Okay, for what you and I might look at the wicked and say, why do they get everything? Why does everything go so well for them? And it's so hard for us. And what Job is reminding us of here is that indeed it'll come around. We don't have to worry about it. It will come around, and God will see to it that we are vindicated. Now, what I want to say here, what I want to remind us of here, is what is the definition of wicked, and what is the definition of righteous? Because we look at that, and it's easy to say, well, I haven't always been perfect. So I've made some horrible choices in my life, and I haven't always followed the Ten Commandments, and so therefore, am I wicked? And because it's always our temptation to base wickedness and righteousness on what? Works, right? We always want to base wickedness and righteousness on works. It's just part of the human conundrum, is that it's impossible for us to get beyond that. We always come back to that. Okay, wickedness and righteousness. Well, the wicked do bad stuff, the righteous do good stuff. No, get that out of your head. Wickedness and righteousness are not defined by works. They are defined by faith. Okay, defined by faith. Or maybe a better way to understand it, particularly in an Old Testament context, is they're defined by relationship. Okay, when you are in relationship with God, you are righteous. When you are not in relationship with God, you are wicked. And it doesn't matter how much good stuff you do. No relationship with God equals wicked. And it doesn't matter how much bad stuff you do. No relationship with a relationship with God equals righteous. So you can have a righteous person who is a horrendous sinner, and you can have a wicked person who lives as though he were a saint, but he's not. He's not, because of faith. Okay, hand of faith, right? Gift of grace. The hand of faith grasps the gift of grace. If you have that relationship, you are righteous. Okay. Any questions on that before we move on to the next chapter here on chapter 28? Any questions on wickedness and righteousness, understanding Job's hanging on to integrity at all costs? Anything like that? Any questions or comments? Okay, I'm not seeing anything come up, but feel free to type in the comment box if something comes up for you in a moment as we make our way through chapter 28. Job continues. Okay, this is his moving on. Surely there is a mine for silver and a place for gold that they refine. Iron is taken out of the earth, and copper is smelted from the ore. Man puts an end to darkness and searches out to the farthest limit, the ore in gloom and deep darkness. He opens shafts in a valley away from where anyone lives. They are forgotten by travelers. They hang in the air, far away from mankind. They swing to and fro. Okay, just to help you with that imagery there, this is the way they often mined ore. So he's talking about literal mining practices here. And often it was slaves, and they would lower them into the mine shaft. They would dig the mine shaft down, and they would lower the slave into the mine shaft by a rope. And he would hang rather precariously from a rope, and and hammer away on at the sides of the shaft to get whatever he was mining, copper or silver or gold or whatever it was. He would hang there in this dark shaft, probably with a torch of some sort for light, or torches for light, and that's how they would mine. What a hideous job. Verse 5. As for the earth, out of it comes bread, but underneath it is turned up as by fire. Okay, so out of the earth comes bread, right? Wheat grows in the earth, but underneath, what's going on? You have all this. You're down there in this tunnel, and you're this. It's this horrible place down there, where miners are building these huge fires, usually near the wall of the tunnel somehow, because what they would do is they would heat the rocks until they'd crack. That's the way they'd get at the ore. They don't have dynamite, in these days. This is one of the ways they mine. Is they have. So you can imagine now you're in this dank, dark mine shaft, now with a roaring fire where it's now getting hot, and of course the mines, the deeper you go, the hotter they get too. So that's the imagery there. Out of the earth, out of it comes bread, right? Because you grow wheat on the earth, and it's you can imagine beautiful grain fields blowing in the wind. In the meantime, underneath that is this mining that's going on. Okay, underneath the earth with these fires and people sweating and hanging precariously from ropes and whatnot. Its stones are the place of sapphires, and it has dust of gold. That path no bird of prey knows, and the falcon's eye has not seen it. You can picture the birds of prey flying over these fields. They have no idea what's going on in these mines underneath, right? Despite, and he picks the falcon and the bird of prey, whatever that was, notoriously good vision, right? They can see they can see a mouse from whatever, a mile up in the sky or whatever. The proud beasts have not trodden it. The lion, which was considered the greatest of the beasts at that time, the lion has not passed over it. Man puts his hand to the flinty rock and overturns mountains by its roots. Okay? So these are things that the birds of prey, the animals, they don't understand how to do this. Okay? They don't really understand this at all. And yet we, in our human ingenuity, are able to get gold and silver and iron and copper and all that stuff out of this earth. These magnificent beasts and wonderful birds that can see a mile down and all this stuff, they have no idea how we do this. Verse 10, he cuts out channels in the rocks, and his eyes see every precious thing. He dams up the streams so they do not trickle, and the thing that is hidden he brings out to light. So the damming up of the streams there, talking about the springs that flow from deep within the earth, that an animal goes and drinks fresh water from the spring. The animal has no idea where that water comes from, but Human beings can dam up the springs deep in the earth and stop that water from flowing. They can bring sapphires and jewels and opals and all those things to light. Then he asks in chapter 12, but where shall wisdom be found? And where is the place of understanding? Man does not know its worth, and it is not found in the hand of the living. The deep say, it is not mine, and the sea says, it is not with me. It cannot be bought for gold, and silver cannot be weighed as its price. It cannot be valued in the gold of Ophir, in precious onyx or sapphire. Gold and glass cannot equal it, nor can it be exchanged for jewels of fine gold. No mention shall be made of coral or of crystal. The price of wisdom is above pearls. Of course, pearls were a big deal, right? Even Jesus talks about the pearl of great price. That's how expensive pearls were. The topaz of Ethiopia cannot equal it. Interesting here that Job is aware of Ethiopia at this time. Which, remember, we're talking about the time of Abraham, so he's already aware of Ethiopia, and apparently known for their topaz. Nor can it be valued in pure gold. From where, then, does wisdom come? And where is the place of understanding? It is hidden from the eyes of all living and concealed from the birds of the air. Abaddon and death. Abaddon is just another word for Sheol, right? Place of the dead. Abaddon and death say, we have heard a rumor of it with our ears. God understands, verse 23, God understands the way to it, and he knows its place. For he looks to the ends of the earth and sees everything under the heavens. When he gave the wind its weight, meaning its force, its ability to destroy things, its force. When he gave the wind its weight and apportioned the waters by measure. When he made a decree for the rain and a way for the lightning of the thunder. When he saw it and declared it, he established it and searched it out. And he said to man, behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom. And to turn away from evil is understanding. So I think this is a really, really important chapter for us right now, because in the midst of this virus thing that's going around, we can become so fearful and so panicked over things like a virus. A virus is a very small thing to God. This is the God who created wind. This is the God who set the oceans in their place and told them how far they can come. The problem is that God will not be controlled. Okay, God will not be manipulated, and we don't like that. Okay? Human beings do not like that. It is a natural instinct within us to try to control things. And the more technologically advanced we become. Now, you remember, for Job, Job thinks that mining is a big technological advancement here. Learning how to crack stones with fire and get gold ore out of it. Well, for his time, that's a pretty big technological advance. Job never could have imagined virology or the kinds of labs we have and the kinds of experimentation we're able to do, and all the things that the tiny things we're able to see, these tiny little things that we're able to see. Sometimes the tiny things become our gods, is the problem. The more advanced we become, the more we are able to break down every little thing in the world, the more temptation there is to worship the creation instead of the creature. to believe in the creation. And by worship the creation, understand clearly what I'm saying here. I don't believe that any any Christian person goes out and worships fire or worships the sun or something like that. By worshiping creation, what I mean is people who will hang on every word that comes from science, every word that comes from a health professional, every word that comes from somebody, sometimes a politician, somebody who's supposedly in the know, as though that person can control anything. Okay? Remember, man's technological advances are nothing compared to God. Okay? Never let yourself put technological things, scientific things, over God. One of the things that I attribute to my father, and was always so helpful to me, because my father, was a chemist. And one of the things that was so helpful to me was his firm understanding that science was the study of the way God made the world. Okay? It was human beings trying to understand what God has done, recognizing that we'll probably never get it. We'll never get all of it. We'll never completely understand it. But science is the study and trying to learn what God has done. But never allow yourself to be tempted to worship the science, which is the creation, instead of the creator, the one who set it all in motion. And that's what Job's talking about here. He says wisdom isn't technological advances. Wisdom isn't knowing how to do mining right. That's not wisdom. Wisdom is fear of the Lord. Okay? Wisdom is fear of the Lord. And talk about that word fear. It's an interesting word there. It's yirat is the word in the Hebrew. It comes from yirah, which means fear. It can also mean terror, but it can also mean reverence. Reverence, right? So sometimes we tend to think of fear as a bad thing, and I've even had people tell me at times in the past that they don't want to worship a God that they have to be afraid of. Okay? They don't want to worship a God they have to be afraid of. And they list off all the things they judge as horrible that God has done. He killed all the firstborn in Egypt. He drowned all those people in the Red Sea. He killed 123,000 in battle with the kings. They go all the way through all the things they judge that God has done that is evil. And they don't want to have a God that they have to be afraid of. I, on the other hand, don't want a God in whom I'm not afraid. Okay? I don't want a God in whom I have no fear. Because if I have no fear of my God, then my God is smaller than me. And the last thing in the world I want is a God smaller than me. Okay? Again, think in terms of this motif of small versus large, right? I'm working on a course right now in C.S. Lewis, and I met with my professor today, and we were talking about The Great Divorce, which he believes is Lewis's signature work, at least in the realm of Christian literature. Of course, Lewis is a very prolific writer, and he wrote a lot of textbooks and a lot of literary critiques and things like that too. But in the realm of his Christian literature, he believes that The Great Divorce is his signature, his signature work. And if you read The Great Divorce, what happens at the end, and you really should read The Great Divorce if you haven't, because it's a phenomenal little book. It's not a weighty tome or anything. It's a little small book, but it is phenomenal. In that, in the end, he discovers, the protagonist in the book discovers that hell is this tiny little speck of existence inside of heaven. Okay? That it's like laying in the dirt of heaven. And all the souls in hell are tiny, infinitesimal, so small that a drop of water in heaven drowns them. Okay? that their a blade of grass dropping on them is like being struck by a sword. Okay? And Lewis plays with this motif of small being evil and large being of God. Okay, I really like that motif, and I really like the way Job uses that kind of stuff when he's thinking about it too. Understanding that God is vast, God is gigantic, and we can never grasp God. We can never, and that's why it is so perilous to judge God. We never want to judge God because we don't understand it all. He does. Okay, he does. All we have, that we keep him first and foremost. Whatever we don't understand around him is fine, because there's far more that we don't understand than we ever will understand, right? Okay? But as long as we have him at the center, first and foremost, we're going to be fine in the end, and that's where Job is here. Behold the fear of the Lord. That is wisdom. And he says, no matter what, I'm holding my reverence for God. All right, moving on to chapter 29 is Job's summary defense begins. And again, if you have questions or comments, type them in, and I'll get to them in the comment section, because I can actually see it pretty well now. Job's summary defense. And Job again took up his discourse and said, "Oh, that I were in the months of old, as in the days when God watched over me, when his lamp shone upon my head, and by his light I walked through darkness. As I was in my prime, when the friendship of God was upon my tent, and when the Almighty was yet with me, when my children were all around me, when my steps were washed with butter." Yeah, I love that. My steps were washed with butter. Anybody who knows me knows of my love affair with butter. Recently, I took a picture of our freezer, and we had 6 pounds of butter in the freezer, and I sent a picture of it to Sarah and Neil, and told them both that I was concerned because we were running low. When my steps were washed with butter, and the rock poured out for me streams of oil. When I went to the gate of the city, when I prepared my seat in the square, the young men saw me and withdrew, and the aged rose and stood. Job's remembering his glory days, of how wonderful it was, and how he had there was such reverence for him. That when he would walk up, the young men would withdraw, not withdraw out of fear, but withdraw out of reverence and sort of a humble obedience. And old men would stand when he approached. And then just, his wealth and stature, it was like his steps were covered in butter. I mean, obviously, if you have enough milk to make butter, you're doing well. That means you have a lot of cows. Let's see, when I prepared this imagery, the princes refrained from talking and laid their hand on their mouth. The princes refrained from talking in the presence of Job. The voice of nobles was hushed, and their tongues stuck to the roof of their mouths. When the ear heard, it called me blessed, and when the eye saw, it approved, because I delivered the poor who cried for help, and the fatherless who had none to help him. The blessing of him who was about to perish came upon me, and I caused the widow's heart to sing for joy. I put on righteousness, and it clothed me. Oh, listen to that metaphor. I put on righteousness, and it clothed me. When did you put on righteousness? When did righteousness clothe you? Okay? My justice was like a robe and a turban. When were you dressed like that? Okay, and the answer is your baptism. Okay? You were clothed in righteousness. Your justice is like a robe and a turban. Because I contend that one of the greatest problems we have as the people of God is forgetting that we're the people of God. In the sermon on Ascension, this Thursday's Ascension, by the way, 7 o'clock here at church, or you can live stream. It'll be live and in person for those who wish to be here, and it'll be streamed live 7 o'clock Thursday. the Ascension service, and one of the things I talk about in there is reminding us who we are. That if we forget who we are as the princes and princesses of heaven, why on earth do we think anyone else would remember who we are? Okay? I was eyes to the blind and feet to the lame. Verse 16, I was father to the needy and searched out the cause of him whom I did not know. I broke the fangs of the unrighteous and made him drop his prey from his teeth. Okay, you got the lion imagery there, or the jackal or the hyena. Then I thought, I shall die in my nest, meaning safe and secure, and I shall multiply my days as the sand. My roots spread out to the waters, with the dew all night on the branches. My glory fresh with me, and my bow ever new in my hand. Okay, my bow, you shot arrows of the bow, and if the bow's old and cracked and dry, it breaks. Okay, but his bow is new, ever in his hand. Men listened to me and waited and kept silence for my counsel. After I spoke, they did not speak again, and my word dropped upon them. This is not conceit or arrogance. This is Job just saying what his life was. I smiled on them when they had no confidence, and the light of my face they did not cast down. I chose their way and sat as chief. I lived like a king among the troops, like one who comforts mourners. Okay, so Job was not a man who led from someplace else and sort of called in the orders. Job was a man who lived with his troops, right? He lived in the midst of his people. But now, chapter 30, but now they laugh at me. Men who are younger than I, whose fathers I would have disdained to set with the dogs of my flock. Dogs are not pets in the Old Testament. Dogs are not little pocket rats like Danya has. Dogs are nasty, dirty animals that live with nasty, dirty sheep and fight off wolves. But you would never have a pet dog in biblical times. And he said the fathers of the people who are laughing at him, he would set with the dogs of his flock. What could I gain from the strength of their hands, men whose vigor is gone? Through want and hard hunger, they gnaw the dry ground. Night is in waste and desolation. They pick saltwort and the leaves of bushes and the roots of the broom tree for their food. So they eat scrub, basically. They're sort of the garbage. They're driven out from human company. They shout after them as after a thief. In the gullies of the torrents they must dwell, in holes of the earth and of the rocks. Okay. Among bushes they bray, under the nettles they huddle together, a senseless, nameless brood. They have been whipped out of the land, and now I have become their song. I am a byword to them. Okay, a byword. How you describe a byword? A bad story. Okay, a bad story. Is kind of what the idea of byword is. The very ones for whom Job provided charity and justice now consider themselves superior to Job because he's suffering. Okay, and they like it. They like the fact that Job's suffering, and it brings me to a question for us to consider. Why do people love it when those in authority fall? What is it about us that is so greedy for bringing down the very ones who serve us? And I don't care whether you're talking about politicians or pastors or teachers or parents. Human beings are like that. You can just watch for the torches and the pitchforks to appear the moment there's a crack in the wall of authority. People love it. You can count on it. And very often it's the very people who whispered sweet nothings in your ear while you were in power, the very people who seemed supportive, who seemed to be so helpful and so much on your side, and then there's a crack in the authority. Somehow there's some kind of failure, a falling off of the pedestal, and people are like horde of jackals jumping on the person and tearing them apart. Very interesting. It's a very interesting human phenomenon, and it is very true, and it is exactly what Job experienced. He was the man of the village, and when they thought he had done something, they didn't even know what he had done. They just thought, well, he must have done something if he's suffering, right? They jumped on him, and they just jumped on him like a pack of dogs. Okay? They turned on a dime, and suddenly the one who had been their song, verse 9, is now a byword to them, an example of God's justice, and open to scorn. People have been given permission now to treat Job poorly, at least in their minds they have. Interestingly enough, that's what happened in the Holocaust, is that Hitler and his minions gave people permission to hate a group of people who they wanted to hate anyway, okay? Because the Jewish people had dominated banking in Germany for some time, and and I'll get to that in a second, Dave. They dominated banking for some time. They controlled a lot of the money in Germany, and people wanted to have a reason to hate them. And Hitler came along and said, "Yes, they're terrible. They're a weaker race. You should hate them." And people were happy to do that. Many people were very happy to jump right on that bandwagon. Is that the same in other species? I'm not a zoologist, so I couldn't speak with authority on that. But I do think in terms of in the animal kingdom, the way wild animals very often destroy a weak animal in the pack. They'll turn on a weak animal in the pack if it's holding the pack back somehow. I don't know if that's an exact correlation or not, but I think it's something to be thought about. They abhor me. They keep aloof from me. They do not hesitate to spit at the sight of me. Because God has loosed my cord and humbled me, they have cast off restraint in my presence. On my right hand, the rabble rise. They push away my feet. They cast up against me their ways of destruction. They break up my path. They promote my calamity. They need no one to help them. As through a wide breach they come, amid the crash they roll on. Terrors are turned upon me. My honor is pursued as by the wind, and my prosperity has passed away like a cloud. 16. And now my soul is poured out within me. Who does that remind you of? Remember I said Job is a type of Jesus. And now my soul is poured out within me. Days of affliction have taken a hold of me. The night racks my bones, and the pain that gnaws me takes no rest. With great force my garment is disfigured. It binds me around the collar of my tunic. His body has wasted away so much that his garment hangs on him, because he's a sack of bones. God has cast me into the mire, and I have become like dust and ashes. I cry to you for help, and you do not answer me. I stand, and you only look at me. You have turned cruel to me. With the might of your hand, you persecuted me. You lift me up on the wind. You make me ride on it, and you toss me about in the roar of the storm. For I know that you will bring to me death, and to the house appointed for all the living. Let's think about that for a second. Is God ever cruel? Job says he is. You have turned cruel to me. With the might of your hand, you persecute me. I think Job's wrong here. God is never cruel. And God does not persecute us. But, like little children, when things don't go our way, we imagine that God must be willing it. No, no. God is always with us. God is never cruel. God never persecutes. God never tempts. God is always with us. Jesus' words to us when he ascended into heaven, and lo, I will be with you always, even to the very end of the age. And as you will hear Thursday night, always means always. That is where you start. Whenever you're suffering, whenever you're in pain, whenever you're struggling, start there. God is with you. Knowing that God is with you, what can you learn from this situation? What can you discover about your surroundings, about others, about the world, about yourself? What kinds of things can you learn from this? Knowing that God is with you. Okay, Job has it wrong. God is not cruel. God does not abandon us. Yet, verse 24, yet does not one in a heap of ruins stretch out his hand, and in his disaster cry for help? Did not I weep for him whose day was hard? Was not my soul grieved for the needy? But when I hoped for good, evil came. When I waited for light, darkness came. My inward parts are in turmoil and never still. Days of affliction come to meet me. I go out darkened, but not by sun. I stand up in the assembly and cry for help. I am a brother of jackals and a companion of ostriches. Ostriches were birds in that part of the world at that time, not anymore, but at that time, and they were known to make a mournful cry in the night. You could hear the ostriches in the night crying. My skin turns black and falls from me. Whatever disease he had, his skin's turning black and falling from him. And my bones burn with heat. Sounds almost like bone cancer or something, doesn't it? My lyre is tuned to mourning, and my pipe to the voice of those who weep. Okay? So his last few moments here is just talking about how horrible it is and how awful it is for him. Okay, Job's final appeal, chapter 31. I've made a covenant with my eyes. How then could I gaze at a virgin? Okay, sounds strange, I know, but what he's saying here is that he follows God's law, right? He follows God's will. He would not look at a woman impurely. He's made a covenant with his eyes. He has decided to strive for good. Okay, what would be my portion from God above and my heritage from the Almighty on high? Is not calamity for the unrighteous and disaster for the workers of iniquity? Does not he see my ways and number all my steps? Does God not see? That's what Job's asking here. Look, I have done more than the average bear here. I have done everything I know to do to please God. Does he not see? If I have walked with falsehood and my foot has hastened to deceit, let me be weighed in a just balance and let God know my integrity. If my step has turned aside from the way, and my heart has gone after my eyes, and if any spot has stuck to my hands, then let me sow and another eat, and let what grows for me be rooted out. In other words, Job's saying, if I've done this, whatever this is, this atrocity, tell me, God, and I'm willing to take the consequence for whatever you say. But I haven't. I haven't. If my heart has been enticed towards a woman, and I have lain in wait at my neighbor's door, then let my wife grind for another, and let others bow down on her. That's a great euphemism there. That is a great euphemism. That's one of my favorite euphemisms in the Bible. Let my wife grind for another, and let others bow down on her. That's the euphemism for sex. Okay, grinding for another and bowing down on her is a euphemism for let someone else have sex with my wife. If you say that I've done this, if I had done this, I haven't. But if I had, fine, then let whoever wants to come and have sex with my wife. For that would be a heinous crime. That would be an iniquity to be punished by the judges. For that would be a fire that consumes as far as Abaddon, Sheol, land of the dead. And it would burn to the root all my increase. If I have rejected the cause of my manservant or maidservant when they brought a complaint against me, what then shall I do when God rises up? When he makes inquiry, what shall I answer him? Did not he who made me in the womb make him? And did not one fashion us in the womb? If I have withheld anything that the poor desired, or have caused the eyes of the widow to fail, or have eaten my morsel alone, and the fatherless has not eaten of it, for from my youth the fatherless grew up with me with a father, and from my mother's womb I guided the widow. If I have seen anyone perish for lack of clothing, or the needy without covering, if his body has not blessed me, and if he was not warmed with the fleece of my sheep, if I have raised my hand against the fatherless because I saw help in the gate, then my shoulder blade fall from my shoulder. Then let my shoulder blade fall from my shoulder, and let my arm be broken from its socket. Pretty serious stuff there. For I was in terror of calamity from God, and I could not have faced his majesty. If I have made gold my trust, or called fine gold my confidence, if I have rejoiced because of my wealth was abundant, or because my hand had found much, if I have looked at the sun when it shone, or the moon moving in splendor, and my heart has been secretly enticed, and my mouth has kissed my hand, this also would be an iniquity to be punished by judges, for I would have been false to God above. If I have rejoiced at the ruin of him who hated me, or exulted when evil overtook me, I have not let my mouth sin by asking for this life or his curse. Okay, and I'm going to stop there and skip to 35. Oh, that I had one to hear me. Here's my signature. Let the Almighty answer me. Oh, that I had the indictment written by my adversary. Okay, so here's the point. Job is listing the Ten Commandments here, which is really interesting because the Ten Commandments aren't written yet, right? The Ten Commandments don't come until Moses, which is hundreds of years later. But if you read chapter 31 carefully, everything in there is Ten Commandments stuff, particularly Commandments 4 through 10. How do we live with our neighbor? How do we treat our neighbor? He proves here in 13 through 34 that God's law is well known, even though it hasn't been officially written down yet. So I love the fact that you can just kind of find the Ten Commandments in all of that he says. And finally, he says, look, I'm willing to stand before God. Bring them on, because I haven't done any of this. Okay? And if I have, I've paid the appropriate sacrifices for repentance. Very unlike somebody else, right? Very unlike somebody else. What happened in the Garden of Eden when Adam sinned? God came walking in the garden and said, Adam, where are you? God knew where Adam was. It's not like God misplaced him. Okay? Adam and Eve were hiding. Not Job. Job's not hiding. Job is, unlike Adam, he's standing right out there in front of God and everybody, and he is saying, I am righteous. Interestingly enough, as I said, Job is a type of Christ. Here, Job is a type of us. Okay? We also stand before God fully righteous. Hard to understand, because we all look inside ourselves and we know the sin that dwells within us, right? We know the places we have failed. We look at that list in chapter 31 of all that stuff that Job says he hasn't done. But remember that Job is speaking in terms of, I have made the appropriate sacrifices for anything I've done. Job does not contend that he's sinless. He contends that he has followed the rules, and he has made appropriate sacrifices of repentance for any sin that he's committed. So have we. Okay? So have we. The appropriate sacrifice has been made for all of our sin. So we too stand righteous before God. Jesus Christ died on the cross and paid for all of our sins. It is a legal arrangement. It is not an emotional thing. It is a legal arrangement where all of our sin was paid for with the life and the soul of the Son of God. Okay? That's what we count on when we stand before God. Not that we've been so good, but that the appropriate sacrifice has been made. And so we, like Job, when we're suffering, we can stand before God and say, I know that my Redeemer lives. And in my flesh, I will see God. Okay? Chapter 19. It's where Job's phenomenal confession is made. All right. Sorry I went over a little bit. Next week, for the next lesson, we are going to take up Job 32 through 37. 32 through 37 next week. And so let's close with the blessing. Lord, bless us and keep us. The Lord make his face shine upon us and be gracious unto us. The Lord lift up his countenance upon us and give us peace. Amen. All right. Well, I set it up tonight so that we could have plenty of room for comments, and no one had a comment except Dave and Deb and Sarah were testing. But hopefully you will have the opportunity to read 32 through 37 and be prepared next week to come with questions and comments. I hope this format worked out well for you. I changed it from my phone to the computer here, and it seems to have worked for me. So let me know if it didn't for some reason, or if you weren't able to follow, or something, if something was wrong technologically that I don't understand, which is certainly possible and even probable. All right, have a good night and God's blessings to you, and I will see you soon, hopefully Thursday night.